Hi everyone. My name is Black Ice. I have been in the Garrysmod community for around 21 years. Soon, I believe I will begin to move on from this incredible game. I wanted to make a little history note of my maps, something to preserve their progress. I will show you my maps, some of their features, and perhaps their intentions, starting from the early to the most recent. Please sit back and relax and enjoy the video. If you have any questions or want to reach out, please do through the official channels. I am always happy to have a conversation about my content. First, I think it's important there's a, hopefully, brief background on how they came about. Before 2015, when Magnum released Track Pack 1, the Trainbuild mapping community was a bit chaotic. Back then, rails were almost always brushes. This meant using map geometry instead of models. This made maps very inefficient, less detailed, and calculated to maximize fun and using your imagination. Some maps were just very empty. This didn't stop the mappers, however. Some maps got very creative, and some of them are being shown to you here. We could go on all day about their features, but maybe that's a video for another time, or someone better than I will make it. Unfortunately, none of my pre-Simply Train maps survived. If I ever find them, I will do my best to make a follow-up. So with that, we will begin with Simply Train 1. Welcome to Simply Train. This is the spawn room. It contains seating, vending machines, a ticket help desk, and even a kitchen. And this is the whole map. It may not look like much, but at the time I was very proud to have released my first map to the public. When making the map, the main focuses were to have build rooms, stations, and roads. In the end, the map contained the following: 5 stations, 10 build rooms, 2 hotels with lobbies and rooms, car fun zone with various ramps, a functional, expansive road network, shops and offices, vehicle loading area, a vague gas or liquid storage facility, 2 yards for operations, even a narrow gauge railway area. Released in August 2015, Simply Train quickly became my most popular map. It stirred me on, gave me motivation and inspiration to continue. Little did I know, many communities would come and go, but the formula stuck around. Welcome to Open Train. It's not much to look at, but I suppose momentum was the key. I wanted a flat, open map for flying in and around the tracks. I always considered this map unfinished, and I believe I ran out of ideas, so tidied it up and eventually moved on. This would have taken me about a week at the time. Today, probably a day or so. There's not much to look at, but let's see what we do have. 4 stations. 1 even has a runway. A storage bay, though it isn't a build room. And the Simply Train narrow gauge fun zone makes an appearance too. While the map is quite empty compared to the first Simply Train, you can see there's plenty of tracks. In hindsight, you could see from both maps my use of 2 to 4 railways, which started to become standard feature alongside the many, many loops. Welcome to Quick Tracks. I promise, this isn't a trend. This map was made partially out of boredom and partially out of necessity. I wanted a map that anyone could jump onto. Spawn a train. Drive it around. It was mainly for testing, but as the saying goes, less is more. It was a surprisingly popular map. My guess is that people wanted the same thing. A simple, yet effective, place to test their trains. Its features included a station to make sure your train would fit, a ramp to make sure it could climb correctly, switches to make sure it didn't derail. And that was it, other than a tall skybox for flying around, perhaps in no clip or using a vehicle. Welcome to Simply Train 2. This map built upon the ideas of the first Simply Train. I wanted it to include bigger stations, more roads, more places to go, more buildings to see. However, some of these did not work out. But this map included one big difference, which later my maps would try to replicate in some way, which will be revealed shortly. Alongside the bridge to the left, this station was one of the first pieces in the map. It doubles as a spawn room, has a car park, even features a ramp for freight loading. You can access the opposite platform by road or walkway. At the time of this map's release, I dedicated it to the Blue Arrow community. At the time, they were the biggest contributors of suggestions, feedback, and playtesting. The community has long been disbanded, spread across many new train building communities in Garrysmod. Two things that go hand in hand with each other when it comes to trains and Half-Life is the station. I was always inspired by the starting station of Half-Life 2, which is based off the real train station called Nugati Station in Budapest. I wanted my own, and this was the early beginnings of my large stations. The map also included a coal plant with its own loop and platforms, another large station with an attempt at a unique architecture, its own lobby, and a car park outside. A small platform for loading and unloading cars, mainly for use at the ramps to the left. The return of a runway with its very own station, car park, and space to hold air vehicles before the runway. Multiple build rooms, some of which were only accessible through no-clip, and some which were rail only. A few surface warehouses that were not build rooms. What was intended to be a bus station, although it didn't look great. More detailed offices, which you could look out of on the second floor but not into. Even a garage, for all your car maintenance needs. And my signature design, the plethora of loops to go around. You could on occasion have many trains running, some would never meet. But there is one more feature that you can't see from here, which took some people a long time to find. Welcome to the second layer of Simply Train 2. I remember wanting to have a really large map and tried to find ways of connecting them both. Unfortunately, either my technique or map limitations at the time prevented me from making it work properly. Nowadays, it's relatively trivial if not only slightly time-consuming to make two layers work together. This layer featured a harbor, a functioning removal section, or a trash compactor if you want to call it that. A couple of platforms, a small concrete road network, and a coal delivery plant. Compared to the surface, this area was very bland, so I won't go into much detail. However, it contained the usual formula of throwing loops everywhere. It was functional and ugly, but sometimes appreciated. Welcome to Show Train. Similar to Quick Tracks, what you see is what you get. The origin of this map came when someone from the Blue Arrow community, if I am correct, began talking about a competition. To show my support, in a day I whipped up this map so people could show off their trains. It featured wide curves, lots of lanes to choose from, and a spawn room to boot. And that's all there is for this map. Then came along Car Na Rail. Released in May 2016, it took around a month to make. The inspiration for this map was actually episode 2 of Half-Life 2. I wanted it to be a map with a forest, a couple of stations, some build rooms, and a road network. Looking back, the map's forest is very sparse. To combat this, one solution to this could have been to use tree cards, which were highly detailed textures that you used at a distance. Combined with the tree props, it would have looked more appropriate. At the time, using this many tree models actually slowed the map down. One map that had this issue was Bot Map v3, which often caused a lot of lag for players. At this time, I was unsure if I wanted paths for pedestrians. As my roads were all brush-based, it would have taken up 3 times as many resources to do. This area was an attempt to combine City 17 design with White Forest's foliage. As usual, there was the attempt to throw in a couple of yards for the use of playing around in. As described before, the current form is described as operations. I also tried to make a more modern station that was slightly simple and elegant. However, I neglected to add proper lighting to this building, but it went unnoticed for a long time. It featured rows of seats, and a ticket area, and large glass windows to see out of. The platforms were very large, much larger than they really should have been. Outside the station featured the same garage from the Simply Train maps, albeit without a door. Next door was a tower block, though it was inaccessible, purely for decoration. Slightly further, featured some warehouses. They were not build rooms, however. I was attempting to match the color theme of the map. This area featured a large train warehouse with pedestrian and vehicle access. I wasn't really sure how to design it, so it has a strange corner cut off on the roof. The exterior by the rails looked interesting. It felt a little bit like it had come from White Forest. Above the train warehouse featured more colored warehouses. Opposite them were two actual build rooms for players to use. They were only accessible by road. This map featured no rail build rooms. Next to those very build rooms was a simple office. Similar to the ones from Simply Train, this was a single-story carpeted office. The map already featured the same office from the previous maps, so this helped break it up a little bit. This is the second station. Not much to look at, but featured twice as many tracks to use, a car park and a small station building. And that's it for Car-Nar Rail. Other than what was shown, it also featured a tall skybox, a concrete area for sandbox playing, and lots of green space. At this point, people began noticing a common theme, Half-Life aesthetic, with corridors of tracks. Due to the way I make and design maps, it's natural that it just comes this way. I wanted to give my maps functionality, something for players to explore and have fun in, because that is what I used to enjoy too. Welcome to Trainway. The creation for this map took place almost immediately after Car-Nar Rail. It took about 3 to 4 days to make, and featured something no other map of mine had done yet, which I learned a lot of lessons from, albeit still had a way to go. What you are seeing here is the spawn station, featuring 4 tracks and a car park. I wanted it to be very lit up, so I used glass on the roof. It seems at some point, a texture has gone missing. This was merely a concrete yard. This yard was intended to be a warehouse, and then an elevator to the underground. Those plans were scrapped, and we now simply have a skeleton of what was. This is the same station from Car-Nar Rail, with more lighting. It seems I learned my lesson. In this area features Car-Nar Rail's office, and the same decorative building, albeit a different texture for variation. And here it is, the newest feature of my maps. Tunnels. I wanted to make a very expansive network that went down and down, inspired by a very, very old map called RP Subtransit. Only the real OGs will know that map. And that's it for Open Train. It was very basic, made in a few days. I do remember making it as partially an excuse to make tunnels, but to also test my mapping speed. I wasn't the best mapper, nor do I agree now. But even then, I knew my maps had their own flair and taste to them. It wouldn't appeal to everyone, but it was interesting nonetheless. Welcome to Narrow Straight. This map was a proof of concept map, using Ron's narrow gauge tracks. His add-on was meant to be a higher quality alternative to Magnum's track pack narrow gauge tracks. Unfortunately, I never used them again after this map. But I never used Magnums either. I suppose in the end I just didn't have a good use for them. It featured 4 platforms, 2 on either side. A spawn zone, in the middle of the map. 2 bridges, mainly for sightseeing and photo opportunities. And 4 switches, 2 on either side, apparently with models lost to time. And that's all there is to it. I remember testing narrow gauge trains at the time, and they worked okay, but in my experience there were lots of issues. The problem with the source engine is that the smaller you go, the more strange the physics can get. Generally, it's advisable not to go that small, though some creators make it work. Narrow gauge in Gmod isn't necessarily an issue, but I prefer my full-size engines. I do wish I had found creative ways to include them in future maps, like using them in mines. As discussed before, old maps like a P-Sub-Transit gave a lot of inspiration, and the underground was something I really enjoyed. Welcome to Trains Roads. This is all there is to it. This is the spawn room, and features a giant white screen for your server logo. Don't worry, I'm only joking. You have to know clip out. This is the spawn building. This ended up becoming my most popular map. Using all the lessons learned from previous maps, I could very well have called this simply Train 3, but I decided Trains was much more obvious as to what the map design was like. It was released in June 2016, a month after Narrow Straight. I believe I may have actually been making this map after Trainway, and made Narrow Straight in between. I remember being up for hours at a time, hammering away at the map. It featured a large central station with a unique barrel spawner, multiple build rooms, an underground, the Simply Train 2 bus station, much more nicer textures such as softer concrete and grass to give it that sandbox feel, and a more improved, smoother road network. I was very proud of this map, and it was even featured in a video by Spycakes over 7 years ago, garnering millions of views. The terrain is much more deliberate, such as rocks and trees, and even features a bumpy hill area. Now over a year later to October 2017, we move on to Trains 2. Don't be confused, this isn't from Half-Life 2. The original intention for this area was that you would spawn in this vague back area, travel down the staircase, and at the bottom, you would appear onto a large underground train station with a walkway. Across the station, you could spot multiple doors that looked like elevators. The idea I had originally was to put functional elevators in, then later it changed to making them teleporters. In the end, it never happened. It felt empty, so I put a police station here. It does seem quite random. I'm not particularly sure why I put one in, but I think I was hoping for more roleplay to occur. Nonetheless, it looks pretty good. Admittedly, this one isn't mine. I got it from GameBanana.com. This is the surface of the map. I wanted to build on the success of Trains, back at a time when the map limitations really started to become relevant. I actually stopped developing the map into something huge because I hit a brush limit. I tried to get around it, but at the time I had only just started learning how to make models in Hammer using a tool called Proper, so I was unable to find a reasonable solution at the time. Looking back, the map isn't nearly as dense as it could be compared to more recent maps I have made. The map took around a year to make, starting around August 2016. It was also one of the only maps I made that had a 3D skybox, and the idea was to have a really big map. I had done some concept maps during this, such as testing a corkscrew train ramp down for smoother progression underground without taking a lot of space, or underground skyboxes. Some of these were hit and miss, but you could see what I was trying to do. This was an early version of non-functional detailing. I was trying to make the map look nice, without adding to the limits. Here's another large station. Following inspiration, the idea with this one was large, which I think I managed. To try and reduce map effort and limitations, I tried to use glass on the ceiling to allow natural light, though it was a bit iffy in practice. Some adjustments such as the light pitch would have improved the look. One failing with this station regarding my maps being functional in use was that there was no way to enter or exit the station. Here are some more examples of non-functional buildings in the map. Without them, there would simply be flat ground, walls, or cliff faces, and it would be very empty feeling. These gave the map some semblance of life. Not every map needs functional buildings. That is where your imagination shines the most, making it work where the engine cannot. Can you guess which area of Half-Life 2 inspired this section? This area would reappear in later maps, though much different in design. Naturally, the map contains build rooms, small platforms throughout, and yards. This one in particular is the largest in the map. One thing that hasn't been mentioned so far, if you haven't already noticed, is the tracks have changed to a higher quality. It was around June 2016 when Magnum released Track Pack 2, which included greater detail, more tracks, and more functionality. Where would a map from Black Ice be without its numerous, random enterable buildings? With inspiration from previous maps, I made a new hotel. This one was designed to be asymmetrical, as I noticed I had a habit of making blocky, cubic buildings. Not much has changed there, I suppose. There were multiple enterable rooms and a check-in desk with its own office, though there was no common lounging area this time. There was even a large open space on the top floor at the back of the building. I had not quite yet settled on a road design, but I had begun to include pedestrian paths alongside the roads for most of the map. There would be odd spots this wouldn't be the case, such as on the right side, for example. In this map, you could see the concept I was going for, that the roads would make their own way to the same location to the bottom of the map. I didn't want just the trains to have their own fun. I realized at this point I wanted people to be able to drive the map too, or walk it should they decide to be stubborn enough to do so. To reduce the map's resource hunger, as the roads and tunnels were made out of brushes, I had to try and make sacrifices. In this case, I would make only one side of the road have a path. This would mean instead of 6 brushes to make a tunnel, which would be the ceiling, 2 walls, road, and 2 paths, it would be 5. It might not seem like a lot, but if you take into account how many corners and curves there are, it very quickly adds up to hundreds of brushes saved that could be used for buildings, extra rooms, and more. One feature I haven't touched on yet is a pretty major part of the map, the corkscrew ramp. There were a few variations of this design, dating back to the original Trains Roads map. In an effort to make it smoother, I used a wider track, but had to make the brushes step down. I tried a few times to make them smooth, but either my technique or use of displacements wasn't working properly. This area also featured a park and ride with a nearby station, an office, an observation building with elevators that were planned but never implemented, and a stairway to access a control room above the car park. Sadly, this control room was effectively just an inconvenient office, and it was up to the players to implement their own controls if they wanted to, such as a dispatch board. This room contained a few small yards and switches. In this map, I started to call various locations in the map as rooms. These would vary between something simple like a build room, an underground station, or even a large yard. These rooms could effectively become layers of a map, which is another term the Trainbuild mapping community started using later on. This room, for example, contains only a turntable. This section of the map was one of the only underground stations. It would carry on behind the camera and loop back around itself. The way the Trackpack 2 worked with map triggers meant the trains could theoretically loop forever. Assuming the source engine physics didn't decide to go for broke and derail a train just because it looked at you funny. This particular area also contained this narrow gauge track, which was originally going to have its own layout in this area. However, due to reaching map limitations at the time, I had to abandon that idea, but I like the look of this mysterious, albeit non-functional system nearby, so I kept it in as decoration. Finally, which you will have seen a little of during this Maps Road section, is this underground waterway. It was intended to be a full system, similar to Train Construct 2, which was the inspiration. Alas, limitations caught up with me, and I had to limit what I could do. I still thought this was an interesting area, however. Welcome to Trains Lane. The name wasn't very imaginative, and I remember thinking I would change it later, but it just kind of stuck. This building was inspired by the station at the end of Half-Life 2 Episode 1. Originally, I tried to reverse engineer the work Valve did, but it was too much, so I decided to use it as inspiration instead. This station featured a lobby area with luggage storage and was going to include a security office and bathrooms, but I scrapped these ideas early on. The outside, where you actually spawn, was a simple concrete platform. Early concept had this area usable by road, but I scrapped it in turn for a railroad-only map. As this map's focus was based on trains and not including any roads, the aim was to make a large expansive map, building on the backbone of Trains Roads 2. As this map featured no roads, it only seemed natural not to put it in the name. The use of area portals was a must, as we didn't want following tunnels and rooms rendering and messing with people's performance. Unfortunately, despite trying to not make too many repeats, as you can see in the void between the tunnels, they often did repeat themselves. There was not much I could do, without compromising the quality or effectiveness of the railway. Welcome to the bottom of the map. In this room, there were 9 build rooms that you could only use no-clip to enter, multiple loops, a few yards and some harbor platforms, but this area was very empty. In hindsight, I could have added more buildings or trees. I wanted the existing buildings to be functional, if only a little bit, hence them being only hollow rooms with no doors. This area used to be one of my favorites. I imagined life flying past at high speed down these tracks, passing parked freight trains and imagining a train running over the bridge above. If I had revisited this, I would add more detailing to the walls, perhaps walkways and pipes. I would probably remove the secondary tracks as they don't make much sense, and try to add more detail to the buildings. One specific example is adding a ramp, similar to the one found at the start of Root Canal in Half-Life 2, to add a little homage to the game. Does this look familiar? You might recall this area from Trainbuild 2, that included a station and a narrow gauge area above the tracks. As you can see, it has been stripped back, and only a small reference where the road is, that gives it a little hint of what this area used to be. If I was to redesign this area, I would have kept the narrow gauge decoration, and tried to keep the station, if only to keep up the image of the map simply being extended. I did consider at the time keeping the narrow gauge track, and fulfilling the desire to make it an isolated layout, but I figured nobody would bother, and it would be a waste of time. In hindsight, I think people would really have liked that in this map. In the end, I don't think that would have saved this map, as it did very poorly in subscriptions. Little did I know at the time just what I had created. This took me about a week to make, and it was remade 3 times. This is my version of the train station found at the beginning of Half-Life 2. Anyone who sees this and has played the game immediately recognizes it, but as you can see, it's also quite bare. To try to stick within the map's limits at the time, I couldn't really overdo the complexity of this station. Later maps that featured this station would find a more detailed version each time, with the last version being found in GM Black Prize. In this map, it simply features mostly platforms and a way to navigate to each other. Above the main platform is a hidden-off walkway that you can only access through no-clip. Later versions of this station included the back rooms that the Metro cops won't let you through to, that allowed you to access the upper platforms, as well as additional rooms inside the station, expanding its use. And that was it for Trains Lane. Nothing impressive, but still had some interesting features of its own, including the same surface layout as Trainbuild 2, but with a severe lack of roads and buildings to emphasize the map's railroad-only style. This map might look familiar, but it is actually GM Simply Train 3. The reason it might look familiar is that it was based off of Simply Train 2, of which that map started with a bridge and a station in the middle, so did this map. This map's aim was to have a much smoother, simpler road system that made a little more sense. It would have less buildings, which theoretically allowed for people to place their own. In hindsight, I should maybe tried to include some underground tracks, and used less tracks on the surface. As previously said for another map, less is more, and overcomplicating the map can actually do harm for popularity. This station in particular is the largest in the map, and technically underground. This station, the second largest in the map, was based off of the surface station found in the second Trainbuild map. Unlike that version, this one included a pedestrian-accessible walkway, connecting to a car park outside, making it actually functional. This map also included a few random platforms, of varying designs and sizes. All but one were above ground, and as you know, typically needed in a Trainbuild map. There was even a warehouse with a track line in it. The last part of this map were these build rooms, though they are not actually build rooms. They instead became random warehouses, and I am not sure why I never made them full build rooms. It is likely I either tried to and something went through, or the more simple answer, which may be that I simply forgot to do so. As a result, Simply Train 3 has no build rooms, and with these issues in mind, probably resulted in this map getting hardly anyone to play it. I know what you're thinking. And no, this isn't Trains Lane. This is a discontinued map called Ali Fando. It was the first map to include combined architecture, leaning much more heavily into the Half-Life aesthetic. Simply using shield walls helps increase that feeling, despite them having no collisions. This map attempted to make use of area portals, and lots of them. Sometimes they didn't want to play ball, and would appear to snap open to the other side. While it didn't look great, they still functioned as intended, which was to stop anything rendering on the other side. Previous maps used this, but to a lesser extent. Ali Fando was the attempt to bring this to life and to try and avoid map limitations. In this particular area, it was meant to be a factory with minor, interesting track work. There was supposed to be a rail above the ground, as you can see here, that would appear to take items across the rail. However, I could never get this to work properly. To be honest, it was probably just how I was setting it up, and it didn't really make any difference. At this point, it's typical to start seeing roads being used in my maps. There is one problem with Ali Fando, however, that should have been caught early on. Despite the use of area portals, I neglected to make the layout make sense, so to speak, and so when seeing and using these roads, for example, you could see other parts of the map. This looked pretty awful, and eventually was one of the reasons I stopped developing the map. If I remember correctly, I convinced myself I would return to correct it, but as we all know, that means a lot of work later on. The corkscrew ramp makes a return in Ali Fando, which may be the last time it's used in any map, as far as I can remember. This area would simply take you to the second layer, of which there were two, plus an underground section, which we will get to shortly. This area is the first time I made a non-standard platform. It looks okay, but was very awkward to make. This forest area hides a two-track parking spot for trains. In my opinion, I shouldn't have bothered, as it took up room. While it might not seem like much, this was going to be one of my favorite parts of the map, because I thought the walkway bridge looked cool. This is one of those times where the saying, "less is more," gave me that feeling. As you can see beyond it, this was an unfinished section of the map. This waterway was yet again inspired by the one found in Train Construct 2. I was hoping for it to be more functional, and unlike Trains Roads 2, actually does continue around the bend, so to speak, unlike the part on the left. However, it doesn't go much further, so in hindsight I should really have blocked it off just past this bridge. This was meant to be a milk factory, inspired by another map. As you can see, it's not done very well, and some textures have broken. Other map features included a factory, another factory, random yard, random warehouse and building, random platform, a vague warehouse of sorts, another vague building of sorts, and another, wait a second. That's the police station from Trains Roads 2, attached to a train platform. There's even a courtyard and a build room. At least this map had one interesting feature. At least with Ali Fando, the tunnels felt proper, with stone walls and bare lighting. The height was even reduced to feel more realistic. This underground station went unfinished, as evidenced by the green platform to the left. It was intended that you could get here via road, but the road to the left only led to a dead-end platform on the surface, with no way to realistically get there. I had planned to put a road access in, and even marked the location where it would have been. Alas, it never was to be. This small harbor was one of the last areas of the map that was created before giving up. At this point, the scale of the map had gotten a bit out of hand, and the work to make corrections began to overwhelm the effort of finishing the map. It would take me just as long to fix the errors in the map as it would have been to finish it, so I decided to pull the plug. Up ahead, there's a combine base. Let's go take a closer look. This combine base actually featured a yard underneath, where you could use an elevator to reach it by road. I thought this was a very fun feature, and the idea was to allow transport of prisoners onto combine trains. I hoped to make the building enterable, similar to the early maps I made which had enterable hotels. Unfortunately, it never got further than this. Funny enough, it still remains one of my most detailed combine bases. One of the last features in this map is a coal storage area. I originally wanted to make the conveyor move and be animated, but I could never get it to work. Still, I kept this area in. The final feature of this map is a very simple but still detailed station. It was meant to have a shield wall across the whole front of the tracks, but I either forgot or couldn't implement it, although it is very simple to do. There was a signal box to the left, and a control room in a tower above the platforms. There was a lobby, connected to a car park which was attached to the road network. One subtle feature of this station is that the platforms have a lip, rather than being cube-shaped. As this is quite inefficient for a map when used a lot, it ended up being used sparingly. And that's it for Alifando. As you can see from the void, if you ignore the missing models as a result, the map was very chaotic and disorganized. All these came together in the eventual decision to stop development. Welcome to Black Lone. There isn't anything particularly special about this map, and what you see is what you get. Features include a road network and a simple track network which loops around the whole map on a single track, so the map is ideal for 1 or 2 trains with some coordination if needed. It had a building in the middle, with the beginnings of an underground, though I stopped that early on, as I didn't want a very complex map. One subtle feature of this map is that it is actually the first map to use models created in the Hammer editor, using the very old proper tool. I had been trying to make it work, and when I got around to it, started with a couple of road pieces and a building. This would mark the early days of me making models to make more efficient maps. And that is really all there is to this map. Nothing spectacular, but it worked as a little momentum project to keep my creativity up and give me an excuse to make something. Welcome to Basic, as in GM Basic. I was just having a little fun, making a map in a day, and this was the last map I made that used tracks from Track Pack 2. The gauge was known as PHX, as the original tracks for Garrysmod came from the PHX model pack, and we'll get on to what came next shortly. This map featured a small set of buildings, some trees, a simple station and platform nearby and a runway, with some strange railway design, though it did feature a 4-track system, so you could run lots of trains at once. Now some of you may recognize this map. Welcome to Lifelon, which is the precursor to Life On. We'll get to why the names are almost the same later. In a similar story, I was making this map straight after Alifando, using the newly released Track Pack 3, and eventually, I reached a point that I was very dissatisfied with and scrapped the development. This was also the first time I released an add-on called Black Ice's Model Pack, which nowadays contains thousands of models I have created using the Hammer editor and the tool proper to make. However, I glossed over one important change to this particular map, and that is swapping from Track Pack 2 to Track Pack 3. Initially, this might not seem like a big deal, it's just a new update, right? But that's where the average player quickly realizes that their old train builds no longer fit. I'll now go over the differences between the 3 track packs, which is mainly only a difference between Track Pack 3 and the rest. Earlier in the video, you may have asked yourself a question similar to, if Magnum released Track Pack as a standard add-on for everyone to use, what did they do before that? The answer is simple, and that is a universally agreed upon standard for track gauge. You may have noticed at the start of the video when I showed off both bot maps, Train Construct, and Mobinix that all the maps use their own design for tracks. Mobinix used very thick rails, but very tight curves. Both bot maps used very thick rails, and the curves were okay, but still kind of tight. Train Construct used relatively thinner rails, and the curves were wider, and used more interesting design. There was no design standard, but only a gauge standard. This might still be confusing you, but this basically meant that everyone agreed the middle of the tracks, the gap between the inner parts of the rails, would be around 80 units wide. This was known as PHX gauge, as the very first track models were introduced in a model pack called PHX Model Pack, or Phoenix Storm's Model Pack. It is now in Garrysmod by default, as it was such an incredibly, widely used add-on that they implemented it. It is one of the only add-ons to be put into Garrysmod officially. What does this mean for PHX gauge and Track Pack 3? As the old gauge was 80 units, the new gauge actually uses something called standard gauge. It's now known in Garrysmod as our SG gauge, or real standard gauge. This makes the track much more realistic as to what you find in most countries, and also gives the added benefit of allowing for more tracks to be placed, naturally being smaller. It also had the added benefit of being a very highly detailed model pack, with much more realistic switches and hundreds of models to choose from. This is probably the first map that I considered a big project. Though it was technically smaller than Alifando, the intention was more rooms, better area portal usage, better room design, more detail, more roads, more tracks, and more buildings. As said previously, I had begun creating a model pack called Black Ice's Model Pack, and the motivation behind this was due to there being lots and lots of different add-ons that basically called have all been in one. A great example of this is car add-ons. You will occasionally find car add-on creators that will release a base add-on, and then every other add-on is just one vehicle. While it is nice being able to selectively choose what cars you wanted, when you did want quite a lot it ended up being a hassle, especially if you decided to unsubscribe later on. It was like trying to cancel an Amazon subscription. As a result, I created my pack, which I declared a centralized add-on for all of my maps to use. This way, I wouldn't have to create a bespoke add-on or import all of the models and materials as done previously, and this made the maps much more efficient. It also meant if there were any problems with a model in one map, I could simply recompile the source and the add-on folder, and it would fix the models in those maps too, saving potentially hours of work and headaches down the line. It also meant that as I casually built up maps, I could create models along the way, which eventually led to having thousands of models to choose from. This area in particular was actually the first part of Lifelon, and when Lifelon's development began, also started in the same way. I really enjoyed this type of area. I considered it to be the start or the end of what was going to be a large multi-level map. The very interesting double diamond crossover switch was actually provided by Tech Chris. If you are watching, you already know you're a legend. This crossover would reappear in later maps like Lifelon, but not as a major prominent set of tracks, however still very clearly on display. I like these type of scenes, and you can really see I've begun to settle on a design formula for this type of map that includes multi-rooms and levels. It makes each area very efficient and also less distracting. You can also see that the design of my roads has almost come to its eventuality, but they are not yet models. Most of the roads were still brushes, causing some issues later down the line that I learned from for the development of Lifelon. I liked the crossover so much that I tried to put a second one in the map, to varying success. As far as I am aware, this might be the longest yard in any of my maps. Do you remember the saying, that less is more? In this case, I don't think we needed so many tracks. The gameplay known as operations may have benefited from this, but there was no logical reason to use it. It just appears to have been slapped into the map, with no real reason for it being there. If I was to have gone back to redo this particular area, I would have maybe included some form of industry, to give it a good excuse to be used. It also included a very thick shed, which I don't think even a nuke would penetrate, and a long platform just before the large station in this area that we flew through a couple of minutes ago. This small town was meant to be simple, yet give off a sandbox feel. It could have contained more buildings, in hindsight. And this is the station I briefly mentioned earlier. Where would a black ice map be, if not for its Half-Life themed stations? The platform you see in the middle, surrounded by fences, was originally supposed to be a station or lobby building. I'm not sure why I never bothered making it. Perhaps I couldn't be bothered at the time, which is ironic because I put a lot of effort into the building, including putting windows that could see out, but not in. At least there's plenty of parking this time, however. And that's really all there is to Lifelon. It was nothing exciting, and like I said, it ended up being smaller than Ali Fando. The quality, however, was definitely increasing. The softer grass and better placement of textures, more models being used, the map getting higher detail, it all showed what I was really beginning to do, how far I'd already come in making the maps. The map still contained multiple build rooms, which is something I made a lot of, and probably would have made way more of. In the end, I reached a part of the map that I thought to myself, I've trapped myself in a map that I have no idea what I'm doing with. I made the sad decision to end the map cycle, but I kept the files, just for a rainy day, of course. Welcome to Lifelon. This was truly my biggest mapping project yet. This map actually took around 2 years to make, and I used all my lessons learnt up to this point in it. However, little did I know, I still had a lot to learn, and if I had applied some of this knowledge early on, Lifelon could have been what I wanted it to be. Let's use the teleporter, and start from the beginning. Using the teleporter on the left, we are brought to Lifelon City Terminus. The station is made out of mostly models, which is probably why the lighting seems a little broken. If I had spent more time on the lighting, it would have looked okay. As you can see, the Lifelon double crossover diamond makes a return. This was the very first thing in the map. One section of Life on City, this area has gone through a few different design changes. At one point, the car park for the station was very long, and there was even a tall office on the left. As you can see, most of the map here is actually made out of models. This was brand new for me, and really allowed me to push the boundaries of the map limitations at the time. Not much imagery exists of the layout before, but this was it. I can't remember exactly why this was changed. This was on a test version of the map. I think I just kept running into issues with the models, owing to a version of the proper tool I was using at the time to make them. One feature I was and still am disappointed in never achieving was my version of a root canal. This was envisioned as going throughout the map and different layers, providing a unique and alternative way to get around the map. I also imagined people using it to race, or to escape other players. It briefly extended to the city harbour, as I will show you momentarily, but eventually was pulled back until all that was left was a small section that ran into an ominous black wall. The train tunnel on the right would lead to the second part of Life on City, and the left to the bridge over the city harbour. Up ahead is part 2 of Life on City. As you can see, the road network is much more detailed and standardized. There are small variations in the road, but for the most part they are predictable. This area has gone through probably some of the most changes in the map. It used to contain smaller buildings, but with the progress on Black Prize, I returned to give this area new life, and make it much more interesting and detailed as a result. It even has a unique feature of houses climbing up a ramp, and a build room to boot. This area is technically part 3 of Life on City, or the outskirts. It contains a gas station, bus station, park and some buildings. It once featured a tunnel for pedestrians to reach the next layer above, but this was scrapped as it was buggy. The bus station has changed location twice, and my favorite part of this area is the park. I only wish I had made more of them in the map. Another fun fact is that at one point, there were 5 micro build rooms in this area, but they were scrapped due to map limitations requiring certain sacrifices. This particular warehouse went through 4 different versions before this. It started off as a combine base, then a helipad to the right on a platform, then a build room, and finally resulting in this. I was never really pleased with this particular spot, and I wish I'd simply made it a few build rooms instead. Returning to the terminus, let us head down the left tunnel towards the city harbour. These tunnels were made in one go, and then turned into models later. They are covered with invisible brushes to prevent leaks. Welcome to Life on City Harbour. As you can see, one of the main features is the railway going over the bridge. This was inspired by the highway in Half-Life 2 where you cross the bridge. You can access this area by rail, which we'll cover later. There are boats on standby, a gantry, and if you look closely, some tunnels by the water. Let's find out where they go. You may remember earlier that I said I wanted a canal tunnel system that went through the map. This is originally where that tunnel led to, and up ahead is an area we will explore shortly. At the end of that area would have been 2 more tunnels that joined again and visited other map areas. The red door and platform on the right is where that tunnel originally exited from. This particular tunnel has changed in design around 6 times, but not majorly. They were mostly cosmetic changes. Moving on to the next section, I would like to introduce you to Root Canal, or at least, my version of it anyway. This was a very interesting part of the map, and admittedly the rest of the map isn't quite as interesting as this area was at first. It featured a fully explorable area, connected by Part 2 and Part 3 of Life on City, a build room that was originally just a freight platform, and at the end of the canal are 2 tunnels that I mentioned before. It never went further than this, unfortunately. Who knows how the map might have turned out? Here's a little run through on the airboat to what it might have looked like towards the harbour. Part of the original design had small objects like mounds, junk and debris, to add fun little obstacles in the way. The last room in the layer is the fc&n freight terminus. It was a bit bland on the right, but the left contained a couple of model warehouses, a gas or liquid storage yard however you preferred it, and a large intermodal freight gantry. It's gone through a couple of design changes, but this was always the intention. Behind the skybox is actually a tunnel that the road uses to get back to the main city terminus, so this layer has a road loop too. We'll expand on that shortly. I couldn't tell you how many times I've been asked if these are trains you can drive on the map. If I had that ability, I certainly would have done it. Do you remember earlier in the video that in Trains Roads 2 there was an upper narrow gauge section? From the terminus, you can see these tracks that appear nearby. Let's find out how to get there. First, we start by going down the right side of the terminus tunnel. We go past the second part of the city's loop and into this tunnel. If you remember earlier, I said there was a rail connection to the city harbour. This tunnel on the right is how to get there. Another thing you may remember is that in an earlier map, specifically Trains Lane, I mentioned that I was a bit annoyed at the looping tunnel designs. Unfortunately, in this case, I didn't have much of a choice, so through the map you do see these quite often. Thankfully, using more detailed models and some lighting tricks, I tried to make them not as visually boring to use. And we arrive at that location, which acts as a nice photo opportunity. Let's see where this goes. While not originally there, a few months ago I updated the map to contain tilting tracks, allowing trains to be more stable at faster speeds. This was helpful as the map contained a lot of tight curves. This area was very empty and only contained a car park, a little platform, and a ticket office. It was meant to break up the tunnel and cliff corridors and provide an excuse to have more visually appealing rooms to visit and pass through. The tunnel we are entering will take us to the proper second layer of the map that contains a small town, station, a looping track, and most importantly, the underground zone. Unfortunately, as you can see, there is a lot of this looping tunnel design in the map. I was more conscious of this in future map development. Before we get to the underground, here are some scenes of the surface layer of this area. It contained many housing models, and at this point I was really ramping up my model creation. This particular area has gone through a few design changes. For example, at one stage there was a tunnel that led from one section to the other for pedestrians, which connected to the tunnel that was made early in the map design on the first layer. There were warehouses and the platform was half the size it is now. There was less foliage, less to do, and I think most people felt it was a boring area, only as a scenic pass-through to get to the underground part or the next layer, which we'll visit after the underground. I was never quite happy with this area, and I wish I had done more with the loop, though I'm not sure what else I could have done with it. Welcome to the underground, which is kind of strange when you think about it, as it's actually above one part of the map and the later upper sections are apparently on the surface. It's best not to overthink it. This area contained 3 build rooms, some road function, a 2-track platform with parking, some decorative buildings though I could have easily added more, and the map's largest yard. Originally, this area was very empty except for the station, build rooms, and the yard. There were no platforms, next to no roads except to go to the next layer, no lighting, and no terrain. The most recent version of the underground now contains all of these: the lighting, platforms, improved road design and buildings. Now this area looks like it's properly used. I envisioned a much greater use of the underground, but in the end I decided to try and keep it simple. I wanted to add a waterfall, for example, and the planned pedestrian tunnels would have cut through part of it, so you could see into these inter-map walkways. The most recent version of the map also included streetlights for the road, which only makes sense in a pitch-black underground. Now we'll head to the second layer, this time using the road. This road tunnel originally had no lights, both due to running out of steam to complete it, and the difficulty in doing so. I was eventually able to return to the map and do this a few months ago. After a short road trip, we reach the third layer of the map. Welcome to the middle harbor of the map. This is actually the largest open section of the map, with the top being the second largest. It had many features such as a granary station alongside the port, a bridge for boats to go under, although the one in this map is the second version, and I returned later to add many more buildings in the area. There was also a loading or spawning zone for trains in a back area behind the port. This office originally had an extra level on top made out of brushes, used as a secret no-clip accessible only observation room. This station in particular was meant to be a combine-themed platform. It was going to have an elevator-accessible watchtower and a bunker. I also wanted a unique feature of a shield wall that could be toggled to stop trains entering. Sadly, this is all I ever got around to making. This large factory from Trains Roads 2 makes a return, and I was hoping to make it a kind of scrapyard, as evidenced by the ruined cars in the shed on the right. Sadly, I couldn't think of a proper design for this, so I left it as it was, hoping someone else could make use of it. In hindsight, I could have retrofitted the factory and turned it into additional build rooms. In this particular area, it was quite a busy switch area, and I could have made this a little neater in hindsight. On the right featured some boats and barges with some trains on them, showing off new rail barge models I made for a feature that never came to fruition. To the right of this area is the granary platform, which used to hold a massive yard, but it was too overdone and chaotic, too hard to figure out, so I scrapped it for a small station instead. Let's take a quick look at the spawning in zone. As you can also see, I tried to make the area portals between the rooms much more smoother in transition, rather than the popping in and out of Ali Fando. If you haven't already seen it in action, Track Pack 3 allowed for the smoother creation of yards, using these offset switches. This meant your trains looked normal, instead of snaking through a yard. It was also visually appealing, and lessened the risk of any physics engine shenanigans that might derail a train. In this area, I tried to make sure that there were plenty of sides to choose from, but they all led to the same entry and exit tracks, so you couldn't get lost or trapped on any side. Unless someone was blocking the exit or entrance, of course. And that's it for this layer. Other features included multiple build rooms on the mound above the harbor. I was considering making moving boats, but figured they would only get in the way of players if they wanted to roleplay incoming or outgoing boats. I also wanted to include a crane, the location of which is the concrete platform between the far harbor arms next to the boat, and the root canal was intended to pop up somewhere around here, but it was around this point I scrapped the root canal idea. Now we will move on towards the final layer, using an area I call the Outlands, or Outskirts if you prefer. This room was intended to be a build room. I think I forgot to make it at one point, but I know I left it on purpose. In the end, I believed someone would make use of it, but it's unknown to me if anyone ever did. I envisioned it as some random player's base. In this area, the roads and tracks run alongside each other, providing a unique opportunity to see each other going back and forth, perhaps even the occasional race. Originally, this area was just the skybox, cliff, and ground. I added trees and telephone poles later on, adding a small but nice little detail. This area went through a couple of retries, but the main goal was to get a station here, with a walkway across. I later added these stone walls, to try and capture a feeling of old-world architecture. I think I could have gotten rid of it, but at least it made the landscape slightly more interesting. This area also included plenty of parking, and a gas station too. Now we will visit the upper root canal, which is the last room before the final area. Once again, lots of traveling required. Here we exit the last of the major tunnels, and enter the upper root canal. When I made this, I still believed I might be able to recover the root canal exploration that I planned, but instead, I decided to finish off this area, almost in dedication to the idea. I thought to myself, who knows, maybe one day I'll return to make it. But I never did. In case I did end up recovering the planned root canal tunnels, I made sure to leave 2 potential entrances to this section. I would have added in some obstacles such as mounds and debris, but alas, it remained its own section. I tidied it up and tried to make it look like it had been inspired by the starting chapter of Root Canal, where you hop down to the rail lines. Hopefully, people will appreciate this attempt. Now we will move on to the final section, the upper harbour and terminus. This is the final area of fc&n. There was originally an extra layer that was intended to be the second to last layer. However, I quickly hit the map limits much sooner than I anticipated. If you were wondering where the second teleporter ended up, it was outside of this station at the car park. This station featured 2 corridors, multiple build rooms, a combined train platform, and the first and only time any station in my maps had a curved platform, to varying success. At one point, in the central hall of the station, there was even a rotating train behind glass, showcasing a train model pack I created. I later removed it, having issues with its textures and rendering, plus no longer feeling satisfied with the design of the trains. The models are still available on the workshop, if you happen to be interested. The ticket area originally had a turnstile, and the lobby area was going to contain NPCs or models depicting it being a busy station. Due to performance issues, this was scrapped. I even tried to make a type of restaurant, or bar, but it never got far. You can see from the flatty wood decals where it was going to be. This is also where the build rooms are. While it might not seem like much, this station took around a month to make. Behind the scenes, the brushwork is complex, which probably contributed to it being half empty, to my dismay. Moving on from the station, we have the factory and residential area. The original design for this harbour was to have a boat that could take trains and cars on board and go across the bay. On the other side was a plant or factory. I had ideas of making it have its own layout, to add a bit of creativity to the map, or at least having it go a different route to justify the boat. In the end, due to it never lining up correctly and the design kept changing, I scrapped it and kept it as a simple harbour. I do wish this feature had worked, and the few people who play tested it really liked the idea, however it just never was to be. I know I said this was the final area, but that was slightly wrong. In order to try and make up for the effort I put into preparing the next layer, I actually scrapped the track tunnels and created a loop, but kept the road. While I don't have any videos archived, I do have a couple of pictures that show it was a highway section. It even featured an airport, although it was inaccessible by road. There was a tall skybox to make up for it. And that's all there is to fc&n. There were 3 more maps that were made between this and the newest map, Black Prize, but one of them was a highway test map made in an hour, and the other 2 are just a flat grass map with a track looping around it for high-speed testing, and not worth discussing, especially as this is mostly to do with the main maps released. Because Black Prize is still in development, I can't show you the whole map, but let's take a little look at what's coming. And that's all for now. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this video interesting. If you've played any of these maps, I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments, especially the older maps. After this clip, I will show some images I found during some map development. A full Black Prize video will be made once the map is complete. I hope you all have a great day and don't have any unforeseen consequences.